Hi there, today's story comes from Joe Brennan's book Donegal Folk Tales, and it's called The Strange Mass. So, there was a young lad who lived just outside Ramelton years ago, who was known to all in the area. The boy was not known for any mischief or wrongdoing, but instead for his friendly nature, his curiosity, and his good Christian living. He served on the altar at Mass and helped the priest out in any way he could. The boy also loved stories and was to be found at any house where there was telling. He would hide himself under the table of any kitchen where there was raking, and he would fill his head with wild imaginings spurred on by the tales. He would often come home and regale the household with some of the stories he heard, although it must be said that there were many he didn't repeat under his own roof, for he knew his mother was of a delicate disposition. Of course his mother, and indeed the priest, would chastise him even for the innocent stories he told them, telling him not to be believing in such foolish superstition. Now the lad saw no harm in the stories and was equally keen to listen to the stories of the Bible. One day when he came home with the tale of Mrs. Patton from the brae, she was sitting near the back of the church when she fell fast asleep. It wasn't long before the poor woman started farting in the seat. You can imagine the sniggering it set off around her. The good boys at the back were having great gas out of it, but one of them, who was a neighbour of hers, felt sorry for her. He tapped her on the shoulder. "Mrs. Patton, your back door is open," he said. "Oh, the chickens will get in and eat all the corn," she said as she jumped up and ran out of the church. Of course this got a great laugh altogether. Now the priest had his back to the congregation and saw nothing of the goings on, but the lad's ear caught the sniggers and managed to glimpse Mrs. Patton rushing out of the church. He got all the details from the good boys after Mass. His mother was horrified at the tale. "Don't use that sort of language in this house, dear. It's unbecoming," she said, "and don't be telling tales like that. It's unchristian." In fairness to the boy, he said nothing to the priest about it, for he didn't want to embarrass Mrs. Patton. However, there was another story he recounted to the priest, and he regretted it greatly. In fact, the priest's face lit up like the fire, and the boy was afraid he was going to cuff him. "Father, did you hear about that woman over in Milford who saw the ghost in the church?" "I've told you before there's no such thing as ghosts," the priest said. "But, Father, this woman is a good Christian. She goes to Mass every day and then to the church in the evening to say the rosary," the boy said. "And what has that got to do with it?" "Well, you can believe a woman like that, Father," the boy said. And what was it she was supposed to have seen?" "Well, Father, she was in the church, like I said, saying her rosary. It was evening time and there was no one else there. All of a sudden she heard movement at the front of the church, and there on the altar she saw a priest who looked awful familiar, all in his vestments. "There's nothing unusual about that," said the priest. "Ah, but Father, there's no Mass at that time, though." "Maybe he was saying a special Mass for some reason," said the priest. Oh, it was a special Mass, all right, for the priest turned around and asked, "Is there anyone here to answer my Mass?" Well, the woman was about to say yes, but when she looked closely she saw that the priest was the parish priest who had died the week before. "She didn't hang around, I can tell, but ran for her life," said the boy. "What utter nonsense, and how dare you tell such lies?" the priest boomed, his face all aglow. He stepped towards the boy, who cowered out of fear. The priest took a strong hold of his arm and shook him. "That man was a friend of mine, a good and holy man who lived his life in the service of God. I will not allow such stories to be told about him." The boy had never seen the priest angry like this, and he had seen him angry many times. When he pushed the boy towards the door, he took to his heels for home and said nothing to his mother. On occasion, the boy and his mother would walk out to the church at Killycreen, for relatives of hers were buried there. On one such evening, the night crept in fast and light dimmed in the church. Now the boy was sitting next to the wall, and whether it was the fading light or the fact that he had been out late the night before listening to stories, he fell asleep. When the Mass ended, people made their way out and home. Because it was dark, his mother assumed that the boy was walking with some of his friends, and so set off home. Now how long he had been asleep the boy didn't know, but he was awoken by the sound of a bell. He looked up to see the altar bathed in the bright light of candles. He was surprised to see the place empty. The priest turned and asked, "Is there anyone to serve the Mass?" "I will, Father," said the boy. He joined the priest on the altar and carried out all his usual tasks with reverence, answering all the prayers in turn. When the Mass ended, the priest turned to him. "Thank you for serving my Mass. You've set me at peace with this world and the next," the priest said. The boy didn't know what he was talking about, but as he walked out of the church he glanced back. It was in complete darkness where it had been bathed in light before he turned his head. He felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced across the graveyard and he thought he saw a shape moving through the graves. He followed it to the spot where it disappeared from sight. In the light of the moon, it saw it was the grave of a priest who had died some time in the past. He realised then that he had served a mass for the ghostly priest. He hadn't recognised the priest, but then he hadn't come to that church too often. When he got home, his mother lit on him. "Where have you been? I've been awful worried about you." "I was just chatting with a few of the lads," he said, saying nothing of his encounter. He did mention it the next night, though, when he went to a house to listen to stories. They all listened, wrapped in his tale. "I had heard some stories of strange lights up at that church," said the man of the house. But there were never any reports of strange lights again, and the boy was delighted to tell his story wherever he could, but he never mentioned it to his mother or the priest. Thank you. Bye-bye.